Hello again, sewing fans. It stopped raining. It finally stopped raining. So, when the weather was quite bad, I bought myself a new hat. I do. I need more hats. I always need more hats. I actually genuinely do with this one though, because my old straw hat that was my summer headwear of choice is literally falling apart. But then I did get it from Debenhams about 10 years ago. This is quite nice. It's a second-hand hat. You know me, I don't really buy new things. It's by a company called Olney in England. Have a look for their hats on the second-hand market. Now I know you probably didn't want to see a fourth trouser video, but that's the problem with sewing. Sometimes you have to go over the same thing again and again and again. I expected this pattern to be better. It gives me the basic shapes that I need to make a garment that I'm comfortable wearing, and I will say that I am so comfortable wearing the trousers that I made, even the mock-up ones, that I've been wearing them in favour of any other pair of trousers, to the point that I have several pairs of trousers in the wardrobe that I've just not worn since making the new ones. And it's a comfort thing. More than anything else, it's a comfort thing. And this is one of the problems when you actually do your own sewing, is you make clothes that fit your particular body, because of course everybody's body is different. And once you find a garment that fits, that not only looks good to you, but also fits in a way that means you don't think about it. You just put it on and you're comfortable all day long. It spoils you. You can't then go and just buy something off the rack, because you know there's a good chance it's not going to fit you and you're not going to be comfortable and you're going to piddle about with it. So you just end up making your own clothes. And over time, that investment of time and effort becomes less important than just being able to go out and quickly buy something. On this video, we're doing the fancy pair. We're doing the Sunday best. And I'm quite happy with how they've turned out. What I'm not happy with is the fabric. This is one of the perils of having to buy everything online at the moment. I was quite happy that I was able to get out to an actual shop and buy actual materials I could put in my actual hands, and that helped no end with the finishing, because it meant that the last bits of hand sewing, I've got matching thread, I've got exactly the thread I want, I'm not having to rely on photos and descriptions and that sort of thing. So sewing is a very tactile thing, a hobby, a skill, whatever. If you can't handle the materials that you're using, you don't always know whether or not they're going to be suitable. So it is very, very worth going to wherever you get your fabric, whether that's second-hand shops, charity shops, actual haberdashers, fabric suppliers of whatever variety. Wherever you are in the world, it does vary everywhere. The ability to just go and handle things. Especially considering that clothes are something that's next to your skin all the time anyway, so you want to be able to know, is this going to be itchy? Is this going to irritate me? Is this going to move the way I want it to? Is this really the colour I want, or is the picture lying? So as a result, the fabric that these trousers are made of, this is my long way of saying it, is not exactly what I wanted. I like the pattern, I like the colour. The fabric does feel very nice, it's very soft. It irons beautifully. But it's not the fabric I wanted. It's a little bit too heavy. It frays like you wouldn't believe. And it's not quite what I was after. It's very close. And the fabric was cheap enough when I bought it that I don't mind. But given the choice, I would have bought something else. All that said, I am happy with the trousers. They are very comfortable, just like the other pair that I made. In fact, they're slightly more comfortable in some ways, because this fabric, I think it's the wool content, it just makes it a little bit more mobile and just not quite as stiff. The trouser legs particularly move a lot nicer than the mock-up ones, so that's good. Right then, I guess we should go into the video. And it's just a one-shot this. Everything's going to be in this one video. there won't be a series here. I've got a couple of different project options for the next sewing video. If there's something in particular you'd like to see, do leave a comment below. My main focus is menswear. I like to make things that I can wear, and my style is menswear for the most part. There's a few unisex garments in there, and there's some things I want to experiment with design-wise. I just haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to do that yet, so watch this space. Or better yet, hit the subscribe button, and then you won't need to watch this space because you'll get notifications every time there's a new video. Right, let's crack on then. It's always worth, when you're working with a very strong pattern like this, spending some time on your pattern matching. These are the two front panels and they're mirrored. So I've just been playing about with the fabric and getting them lined up so you can't really tell one from the other. That should mean when I sew them up, all of my stripes all match up properly. This is the one deviation from the pattern that I'm going to go with, which is for the pockets. So this is one of the pocket bags that goes inside your trousers, obviously, and I followed the original line of that odd slot pocket and chopped that piece of the fabric off. I'm going to pattern match that and make it wider so that this piece overlaps that. Reason for that is if you don't, you end up with your inside of your pocket visible. That's all there is to that one, really. It's just a slightly different construction technique. I think I understand as well, having cut these pieces out, why the original pocket pattern has the method it has, which is this ends up on the bias, so this will stretch. So I'll also need to reinforce this with some twill tape or some non-stretchy fabric or something. I'll figure that out. Otherwise you'll end up with baggy pockets. So I think that's why it's done the other way, but I still don't like it, so I'm doing it this way. Spent some time doing some pattern matching, so when that's all sewn up, all these lines will line up properly, I hope. On this side you can see how it actually goes together, so you've got your pocket bag here, and then your outer facing, and I'll sew those together. I will have to be careful, this is on the bias and a very loose weave, so it's going to want to stretch, so I am going to have to put tape or similar in there. For the facing, the pocket bag is actually complete, so I'll turn under this edge and top sew that, and then this will get caught in the waistband, that will get caught in the side seam. Same with this piece here, even with the strengthening I'll put in, I'll top stitch it as well. It'll just keep everything nice and stable, and then the top will get caught in the waistband. And that should work quite well. One thing we don't really appreciate with making clothes and buying clothes is the time and the number of parts involved. These are all the pieces cut out for these new trousers. Everything's ready to be sewn together. In total, there are 55 separate pieces that I've now got to work through and layer up to get all the bits and pieces I need. And that includes all the various components for the pockets and the button fly and the waistband, and those dark grey ones, that's for the braces or suspenders if you're in America. There's belt loops, because I'm going to do the belt loops as well on these. There's those decorative side buckle pieces. It just adds up and adds up and adds up. The other thing is how long this has taken me to go from a point where I understand the pattern well enough to know what pieces I need to get to a point where everything's cut out. Took 3 hours And that's not unusual. And it's not just because this is an older pattern. Sewing takes a long time. And this is the stuff that we often overlook. So if you do have a relative kind enough to offer to make you some clothing, really, really appreciate them. Because it's a lot of work. It's a lot more than you'd expect. And I think to some degree, fast fashion has spoiled us because we can just go to a shop and just buy whatever. But if it's 3 hours just to get to this point, I wonder how long it's going to be to actually complete the garment. I've never actually done a properly timed piece, as in I've never kept track of the hours exactly on a piece that I've made. So I'm going to do that with this one, and we'll find out how long it actually takes. With all the pieces cut out, I can now look at which items to construct first. So on here, the dark grey ones, they're the loops for the braces or suspenders. These small ones over here are the belt loops for these side straps. There aren't really any instructions at all on how these go together, so I am guessing a bit on this one. And then these 8 over here are belt loops. So I'm going to sew all these together inside out and then turn them the right way out, and that will be this batch of parts sorted out. Then I can move on to the next item, which will probably be the pockets or the darts, depending on how things go together. There we go, all sewn up, ready to be turned out. I'm still unsure about these. I'm going to make them anyway, see how we go. Everything's sewn, pressed, all the belt loops top stitched. The one thing that was nice about this fabric is I could actually match the pattern for the belt loops, so they're all the same size and the same length, unlike last time where they were all different. Thought it might be a good idea to just explain what I'm doing with the pocket, because this is the design alteration from the original pattern, because I couldn't figure out how those pockets are supposed to be on the pattern. I'm going to have some experimenting and some practice, I think, and see if I can get it pinned down, do a bit of research, see if I can find some instructions that are from the 30s or 20s perhaps, that explain better how those pockets are supposed to be done. So what I've done instead is I've looked at modern trousers that I already own. I've looked at photographs of other trousers I could find to see what options were available and how I can improve on this design to make it practical and to make sure that I can avoid things like the fabric stretching on the bias. This is a very, very loose weave for this sort of garment. If I'd known it was this loose when I bought it, I wouldn't have, or at least I would have bought it for something else. This would be fantastic for something like a skirt where you have a lot of drape, but you don't need to worry so much about bias and shapes and that sort of thing, in the same way you do with trousers. So there's a few things that you have to be careful of, because when this is cut on the bias, like it is here, it does want to stretch out quite a lot. But fortunately, the pocket bag I'm using is a plain cotton, and that isn't cut on the bias. So this will give the strength and the stability to the looser weave fabric that you see on the outside. The first thing I did with the pocket bag is sewed this piece on. Now this is the piece that's visible at the hip, so that's your line of your pocket almost, and this bit shows, so you don't have a big white triangle on the corner of your trousers. And all I did with that one is positioned it, rolled the edge of the fabric over, and then top stitched it. This fabric frays like you wouldn't believe, so there is a good amount of finishing required that the other trousers I didn't actually finish the inseams on those, and they've barely frayed at all. They basically, I think it's because it's a twill weave rather than a plain weave like this one, and they're giving no grief. Anyway, once I've got that piece, this is the trouser leg itself. There's a little pleat at the top which gets caught in the waistband, and this took a little bit of braining, but once you figure it out, you lay out your piece flat like this, and you've got, with the pocket bag, you have your fold line there, and I've kept the pocket bag its full size. Even though I'm not sewing to the edges of it, I've kept it the full size because all the edges get caught. This will give extra strength to the other fabric. I don't think I'm explaining this very well, but line the pocket bag and the face up, and then sew as you would do normally, so there's no top stitching there yet. Then I'm going to press this, I'm going to top stitch along this edge here. There's two reasons for that. One, it's going to help it lay nice and flat, so it's going to prevent the pocket from gaping. The other is it will more securely attach this loose fabric on the bias cut to this quite sturdy fabric on the inside, which is not on the bias cut. So that should stop this very large pocket opening from going baggy and should help keep it nice and flat. I didn't see the need to put an extra bit of strengthening or anything inside there. Once this fabric's actually sewn to something else, it does seem to be quite strong, quite rigid. And of course, when everything's sewn up, I will catch the bottom of the pocket there, because that's a high stress point, and the top of the pocket, that will get caught in the waistband. This becomes your side seam, and again, I'm not going to trim off this extra of the pocket bag that's just there. I will catch that into the side seam as well. Again, this will just help everything be stronger and more stable. This is the biggest change to the original pattern, and it is a bit more work, possibly because it's the first time I'm doing it on this particular example, but I think it's going to be more practical and an easier way of doing a pocket on these trousers than the one in the pattern, at least until I figure out how the one in the pattern is supposed to be done. All pressed, top stitching done. I'm actually using a sort of, it's almost plum, the colour of the thread I'm using, which doesn't really match any colour on this, but it blends in, it's really good. So I've got the pleats at the top just pinned in place. These will be held when the waistband goes on. And we've got, as I pointed out earlier, the multiple layers with the pocket bag behind. So that's the bit you see from the outside, which is the inside of the pocket, and then this is the outside of the pocket, but also the trousers, as you can see. And you've got a little line of top stitching there. If we were doing, I don't know, haute couture, we'd probably have white stitch on the back, but why not? I'm quite happy with how they've turned out. They do look like a very large pocket, but you have to remember that on modern trousers the waist is around about here, so that's why these pockets look much larger, because they run all the way up to the top of the waistband, which is a good few inches higher than you might be used to seeing. There's enough fabric here that I don't think you're going to see the lining really, and I don't know, a grey would have maybe been better, but the white's fine. To do these pockets and sew them all up and press them and all the other bits and pieces I did today, that's another 3 hours on our total work tally with these trousers. It is going quite a bit quicker than the first example, partly because I'm not recording as much of it, but also because I actually know what I'm doing a bit better. Just before I get on to the next bit of machine sewing, I thought it made sense to do the hem on the pocket. This is exactly the same as the mock-up, just a quick stitch just to catch the hem, which I've rolled to catch the raw edges, which hasn't wanted to stay put when I've pinned it. This is quite strong enough on the other pockets, so I know it'll be fine here. You can machine stitch this bit if you prefer. You know, it doesn't have to be super tidy. They rarely were in period, and as long as it's functional, that's all that matters. Nobody will see this. Well done. It is quite difficult to make tidy stitches on the camera. This one's the one I did on camera, and it's not quite as nice
This one's much better. Getting through this one fairly rapidly at the moment, and I'm just working on the button fly. This is it's probably the most complicated part of the trousers. So this is the side that the buttonholes go on, and as you can see I've got all the various pieces sewn together. I'll do the buttonholes in here, and then we'll catch these raw edges. Now one change I've made is when I did the mock-up ones I put no interfacing in here because the fabric was quite stiff. This fabric is very loose weave and it's really prone to fraying, so I didn't want to put some stiffening in. I wanted this still to be fairly flexible. So I've just used some lightweight cotton. This is basically what bed sheets are made out of. And all I'm using this as is a stabilizer. And this will just mean that when I do the buttonholes here, they're not going to be likely to fray out. This is going to give the fabric some extra stability and keep everything nice and tidy. It also means that it does make this fabric just a tiny bit stiffer, but not enough for it to behave like it's a completely different fabric. So that should mean that you don't really see any sort of problems with this area. I'm now going to press this, and I'm going to press the other half, which is also done. I've done the darts. Because these are the nicer pair, I'm spending a bit of time doing a little bit more hand sewing than I would do normally. For example, this is the button stand, and normally I'd just top stitch this on the machine, but I want to keep it nice and clean, and I have some nice Gutman thread. I picked up some new thread, some extra strong, which is good stuff. I've already done the other side, so I thought I'd just do a little bit of hand sewing on camera. Try a different camera angle out. At least this way, the camera isn't actually in my way. As annoying as this fabric fraying is, it actually, for hand sewing, is really nice. The thread doesn't snag or bind, and it's really easy to see where your stitches are going in, so you can keep them nice and even. All I'm doing is catching the top layer of the fabric because I don't want the stitches visible on the front side. It doesn't matter on this side because this is the inside of the garment. I'm still putting the effort in to make the stitches look nice, but it just means when you've done a short one, you can't really, the other thing is you can't really see it because of the pattern, but on the other side you don't really have any visible stitches at all. I actually didn't bother to go to the effort of pattern matching this. That was an accident. So that was nice. It's always a good idea to bury the thread when you finish a seam, and all you do for that is you just go through the fabric and pop up a little bit further away, pull everything tight, and then when the fabric relaxes, the thread disappears. It just means that you don't catch that edge, it usually means it stays a bit stronger. But yeah, that's all done. It takes a few minutes to do a seam like that. And from the outside there is literally nothing to see. It's a nice seam. On the other one, similar story. You can just about make out the stitches on there. This one didn't pattern match quite so well, but again, I wasn't trying to because this bit's hidden. And on the outside, instead of the top stitch line that you would normally get, there's nothing there. So it should be a nice smooth finish when it's done. I did opt on this one to do the buttonholes after sewing all this together because there's no reason not to, and it means I can actually space them a lot easier. And the grid on the fabric will actually help me space the buttons. I did really want to put on these belt loop pieces, but the instructions are useless, literally useless. It tells you to put on the belt loop and the buckle loop where the asterisk is on the pattern. There's no asterisk on the pattern at all. So I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with that. I can't figure it out from the little ink drawing of the garment. I can't figure it out from the pattern, and I can't figure it out from the other garments I have photographs of. So I need to do some more research on that one, and I need to figure out how that's actually supposed to go, because this pattern's useless. The other thing is these. These are the suspender braces flaps. But again, the pattern doesn't tell you where to put them beyond try the trousers on and put them where they fit. And it doesn't tell you whether they're supposed to go into the waistband or sew onto the fabric of the legs. And even when you have put them on, it says to sew the buttons to the waistband. So what are these even for, if they're not for sewing the buttons onto? I think that's going to be me done for this stint. That's another 3.5 hours. We're getting there, we're nearly done. But my back's a bit sore at the moment, so that's always a good sign that you should stop. One thing I don't like about this fabric though is how much it frays. It is terrible for it. After you've sewn the seam, I just sew a straight line stitch on the seam allowance, all the way along the seam, and that should mean that the fraying goes no further than that line, which also should protect the seam. As the trousers stand at the moment, the legs are both sewn up and ready to be sewn to one another. The waistband is ready to go, the belt loops are in place. I've just got to pick some buttons out. I haven't picked any buttons out yet for this one, so we'll do that. I did pick up earlier some embroidery thread for the buttonholes, and this was kind of tricky because with this being a multicoloured fabric, you've got to pick your buttonhole thread fairly carefully. And while this one's actually a very good match for most colours, if the buttonhole falls on one of the red lines, I'm going to need this colour. And if it falls on one of the black lines, I've got some black thread as well. On the last bit of machine sewing now. This is the seam that joins the legs together. So I've got all of the waistband sewn on, and on the edge here you can see I've got my fray check seam that I've put in. It takes a while to put this in on every single raw edge that you're going to have on the garment, but it is worth it. I have had a couple of spots where I've tried this out and the fabric doesn't want to fray past it. It doesn't even seem to want to fray up to it. It seems to hold the fabric together quite well. So I'm going to run a seam from the waistband all the way over to the bottom of the button fly. And when I do this seam, this is one of the highest stress seams on the garment, so I'm going to actually sew this twice, and that should then hopefully make it strong enough. I am a little bit anxious about this fabric. Once it's sewn, it seems fairly robust, but I'm a little bit anxious it's not going to wear particularly well. Right then, this is the first try on. There is one slight problem with these pockets. They are huge, so that's where I want the pocket to be, but of course they come all the way up to the waistband, and this was a mistake on my part. I shouldn't have brought them all the way up, so I'm going to add an extra small button here and I'm going to treat it like a detail so that it just holds the pocket shut, because if I take the pin out, the pocket is just huge. I mean, I can get both hands in there at once. But overall, I think they've turned out okay, and I think once I've got the last details, like the turn-ups finished, got the buttons I want on here, I think these will look alright. I'll have to excuse the mess here as well. This is the problem when you don't have a lot of space. I put the buttons and buttonholes in for the pockets. This just closes up this very large pocket, and it just stops it gaping so much. So it's just a standard little button and a buttonhole, and I have a matching one for the waistband. And then down at the bottom here, I just put in a few stitches. This is the stress point on the pocket, so a few extra stitches in just here at the bottom, just to hold that. I've got the first button in there, and I'm using embroidery thread for these buttonholes. So I'm using this sort of fawn coloured one, these tiny little buttons. For the buttonholes on here, because of where they landed, I had to use the red thread. Almost all of the hand sewing is now finished. What I've just started doing here is binding the edge. This is just a very quick round and round and round thread. I'm just running from the bottom all the way up to the top of each seam. It's going to take a while. This is the sort of thing where an overlocker or a serger is absolutely ideal. So here we go. It's a little bit tricky to show trousers when they're not on a person. They require quite a bit of space. So you can see the cuffs on these are quite a bit smaller than on the other trousers. This is in part because of the way that I folded them, and in part because I didn't actually want them quite as chunky. And I'm quite happy with that. To stop them coming undone, there's just a tack that's put in at the seam on the inner and the outer, and I found that that's enough. Once these are pressed, that's enough to keep them in place. If you don't put that in, they have a habit of just dropping a bit. On the button fly, we've got the buttons all sewn in and all the buttonholes done. The top buttonhole's in the red thread because of where it falls on the pattern, and I've used another one of these little pearlised hexagon buttons which just matches the pockets. And you're not really ever going to see these, but it's just nice when there's visible bits that match. And then on the bottom of the button fly, I found on the mock-up ones that this very last button, I never undo it or do it up, so there was not much point putting that extra one in. So instead, I've just sewn at the bottom here, and can't really see, but I've done it on the inside as well. This will just mean that there's a little bit more strength in this area. It is fairly high stress, it's where your legs join and everything moves. So yeah, it's the binding of the edges to stop the fraying, a final press, and then I can show you what they look like on.